Hello everybody. So I am in Minnesota. So this is pretty cool. This is a replica of a Viking church. Now the cool thing about it is that the Vikings actually didn't have religion. So what happened were the Vikings who lived in Norway, they were running out of food, they were running out of space. So they would explore other lands and they would just take what they want. So the British got tired of the Vikings coming from Norway and just taking what they want. So they sent two Catholic Irish priests over to Norway to teach the Vikings to be more civil. So when they did that, the king of Norway liked what the Irish priests were teaching, and he decided that the whole country had to become Catholic. And then they were trying to build churches in Norway. And when they were trying to build the churches in Norway, they had no idea how to build a church because they had never been to church. So the king of Norway sent some Vikings over to Europe to see what churches look like. And when those Vikings came back, they said, well, there are these big buildings and they're built of stone, and they explained all the different sections of them. Well, the king of Norway said, well, we don't have stone, we have wood. We'll build ours out of wood. And this is what they came up with. Now the thing I'm in right now is called an ambulatory. And the ambulatory was where if you were homeless, you could come sleep here in the winter. If you died, they would set your dead body here in the winter. And if you were a slave, you would wait for whoever you worked for who was inside the church in the winter. This little doorway here and this section here is very interesting to me, because if you had leprosy, and since they didn't know where leprosy came from, you would get to hear church services from right out here, because they didn't want you inside the church because they didn't want you to contaminate everybody. Now they know, years later they found out that leprosy is not contagious and that you wouldn't contaminate everybody. This is still part of the place called the ambulatory. Now, the other thing is, even though they decided to become Catholic and they decided to believe in God, they still had a worship to dragons and sea monsters, which we both know that we know that both dragons and sea monsters don't exist, but this church has intricate carvings of dragons and sea monsters in it, which is pretty interesting, because then it's like they had two gods, the god that nobody's seen and that they don't know, so they didn't know how to make an idol form of them, and then dragons, which they never saw and they don't know, but they tended to worship. So this carving here at the doorway, and I'm sorry that I feel like I'm babbling, but it's such a cool story. This carving here at the doorway is all a story of dragons and different beasts overcoming other beasts to protect each other. And the doorway to the church is small. And the reason it's small is so if they ever got attacked, they would only have one attacker be able to get through the door at a time.
Now you are in. What's the matter with this thing? Stop here. Okay. Stop is a column or an upright. Here, here. So, where's the stop around here? Is this a stop? No. Yeah, it's a column. And these columns used to be pine trees that were growing in the forest near Park Rapids, Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
27 feet up to the top there where the roof starts. And then the tree goes down through the floor and it rests on rock. Wow. It looks like it rests on the floor. Yeah. That's not true.
Above them windows, is that all one log?
That's all one log. Wow. Well, all one tree.
Yeah.
Not many trees this big.
I didn't record too much on the inside because there was quite a few people in there and it's a small building. But it's pretty cool. And it is not built with any nails or pegs. It's actually everything pressured together. Pretty interesting story. But anyway, then the King of Norway learned about Martin Luther King, and he decided that he liked that religion better, So he signed a law that made all the Norwegians Lutheran. There, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, because I see my reflection in the mirror. Hi, everybody. Anyway, we're going to go inside and I'm going to show you the ship, which is actually the reason I came to this. So this is the ship that attracted me to this museum. And it's absolutely huge. So let me tell you about the story about this. So back in the day, a family immigrated from Norway. Well, when the kids were growing up, they were learning about Norwegian history, and they became enamored about where they really came from. So one of them decided that he was going to build this ship and sail it back to Norway, from Minnesota to Norway. Well, what happened in the interim of that is while he was building the ship, he found out he had leukemia. And just after the completion of his own ship, he passed away. So his family had told him that if he wasn't able to complete it, they would complete it for him and they would sail it to Norway. So his children decided to complete the ship and sail it to Norway. Well, they ran into all kinds of issues. So what they did is contacted some people in Norway to learn more about Viking ships. And a guy from Norway came over to America and taught them more about the Viking ships. And when he taught them more about the Viking ships, he agreed to help them sail it. And that is what happened. This ship did sail all the way to Norway. And it had originally 13 crew members. One crew member, about halfway through the trip, decided it was not for him because he had a 5-year-old little boy, and it was more important to him to survive life in order to watch his child grow up. So he went back home. But the other 12 sailed on to Norway and were met with honors and valor and all kinds of excitement. Look at that, how small quarters they lived in. And there was one female crew member on the ship, and she was the daughter of the original guy who came up with the plan. It's actually a pretty cool story because they even use the quote about how out of ordinary lives, extraordinary things, I forgot how to say it. Extraordinary things are done by ordinary people every day. And that is what happened with this ship. It's pretty beautiful. And then, I did want to say this story about this horn. So they ran into some rough waters on the seas, and the dragon's horn fell off, and they were shocked because it actually sank. Now, if you know the ship, the whole ship's made of wood, so how did the horn sink? Now, what I know now about oceans and waters, I don't believe it sank. I actually believe it probably got caught up in a wave and just appeared to sink. But superstitious people believed it sank, so then therefore the ship was going to sink. But it didn't. It did take on some water and it did take on damage. And they solved the water damage with burlap potato sacks. It's a pretty cool story. I don't want to give the rest of it away here. I want people to come and explore it. But I am in Minnesota learning about Viking history, which I think is so weird that the Vikings came all the way this far because there's really no ocean here. I get that there's a Great Lakes here, but those are some canals that are going to be pretty hard to maneuver in something like this. Here's the other side of the ship. And I also wanted to tell you about this Halley shipyard. So he took this old building and built Halley's shipyard. And when he did, and he finished building the ship, they actually had to take down a wall of the building to get the ship out of it. Look at that. Pretty dang amazing. And this is what it looks like sailing across the ocean. Isn't that fantastic? And this is the gear that people wore. And it was freezing water. Like, there were times the water was less than 35 degrees. And it was coming up over this ship. I don't know why I like ships so much, because I really am a little bit eerie about water, or leery about water. But I'm gonna get a good picture of that dragon, and then we're gonna go see the museum. And the name is Hjemkomst, I think is how you say it, and it means homecoming. Perhaps this is the Scandinavian American who decided to build this ship and died before he was able to sail in it from leukemia.